Ladies and gentlemen, The Marvels has suffered a 75% drop-off in its second weekend, making it the biggest flop in MCU history. So, today, ladies and gentlemen, because I'm such a nice and generous guy, I would like to turn this failure into a teachable moment, and perhaps show where mistakes were made. First off, Marvel failed to get a rough roadmap in place before creating a multi-film franchise. Now, I know that many people will point to the Infinity Saga part of the MCU and say that they didn't have a plan. The only problem with that statement is that they did have a rough idea, and everything really did get cemented in after Avengers or Guardians 1, depending upon whom you ask. The MCU post-Endgame has felt largely directionless. I'll use Kang as the main example of Marvel's poor planning post-Endgame. The only reason Kang was chosen as the big bad of the multiverse saga was because people in test screenings for Loki Season 1 reacted well to him. I'll repeat that in plain English, ladies and gentlemen. They chose this guy as their main villain for an entire era of movies and TV shows based on the opinions of a highly biased focus group, because Disney only allowed employees and their friends and family into the screenings. Another massive failure and oversight tied to the aforementioned issue is that Marvel had way too many cooks in the kitchen, and too many of said cooks were activists with about as much actual talent as movie blob and little to no knowledge of the source material. You got directors, writers, and actors being cast upon their immutable characteristics instead of, in the case of the actors, their resemblance to the original characters, or their talent, and it didn't help that these sterling individuals couldn't help but insult the fans and source material at every single given opportunity. And that brings us around to the massive continuity and power scaling errors, as every film created the next Thanos-level character. So instead of the slow build-up to one well-written villain that people actually cared about, we got 31 variations on misunderstood, supposedly sympathetic bullshit. And we got a bunch of heroes that were about as heroic as the ATF after they shoot your dog. I mean, hypothetically. And then we come to the Galactus-sized plot holes, such as the giant dead god in the middle of the ocean. No, I'm never going to let that go. That has barely received a mention in successive movies. To be honest, this reminds me of latter-day TSR and its plot hole-riddled, continuity-killing stupidity. And speaking of which, I feel that that is an excellent analogy, as you had a company that built a massive verse, or several massive verses in TSR's case, that were wildly popular, and then they decided to screw it up by flooding the market with poorly made trash that no one wanted or asked for. Sure, they occasionally turned out a decent module or two in this period, but most people couldn't be bothered to dig through the mountain of a dunghill to find the diamonds. But I think that the final nail in the coffin is the exorbitant amount of cash put into these films, with budgets often exceeding upwards of $200 million a pop, and that's before marketing. So when a film or TV show does fail, they take a massive hit, not only to their brand, but also financially, making it very hard for them to recover. So in closing, Marvel and Disney need to hire people based upon competency and actual ability and knowledge of the source material instead of immutable characteristics. They need to get budgets down to being reasonable, and they need to stop relying on extremely biased focus groups. I take payment in Tinder, bullion, and lines of credit, but all joking aside, tell me what you think down below. This has been Pete, the Radical Nerd, signing off.